Hello, everybody. I hope you all can hear me well. So, welcome to the session on data protection, recovery, and resiliency on AWS. And my name is Sabit, and I'm a recovery resilience architect, part of the AWS backup team. And I help customers onboard AWS backup at scale. Like the title says, you might be expecting to hear a lot on data protection, recovery, and resiliency, but unfortunately, we have to shorten it to only recovery because we only have 20 minutes. So please bear with me on this one. This is a famous quote from the well-architected framework of AWS. And as you can see, a resilient workload has to have the capability to recover. So what we're going to stress today is the recovery aspects of what your workloads can go through. And what are we going to cover in the 20 minutes here? We'll go through some of the recovery resilience challenges in AWS today. How do we build a multi-layer access control system for recovery resilience? And we will go through a recovery reference architecture for a couple of implementation patterns. And also, finally, we'll wrap it up with a well-architected defense in-depth strategy for an AWS backup implementation. Let's get started. I wanted to introduce you to a service that has been been available for all of our customers for more than 6 years plus. But a quick show of hands here, like how many of you already know what AWS backup is and who is already using AWS backup? Okay, a couple of them. Okay, so in a nutshell, AWS backup simplifies customers' data protection strategy implementations at scale. That's what it does, and we kind of take away the undifferentiated heavy lifting for customers who are looking to implement data protection strategies at scale. That's it, so simple. But that's not all of it. Most of the time, access to your data is governed by an identity strategy, which is actually a larger topic of conversations that we can probably take offline. But by doing a proper identity strategy, there are a few things that you have to be well aware of. One is the traditional recovery challenges. What are the traditional recovery challenges? Because your backup and recovery share the same identity authentication boundaries, you're going to be having situations where a compromise to your production data or your backup could also compromise your recovery options, because that is part of your original identity strategy that we talked about. Then there could be scenarios where access to your account or organizations could be under threat. That there are scenarios where if your identity path was somehow compromised, you don't have access to your account in which you have the production data, your backup, or the organization itself, which actually holds the entire backup and the backup data and the production data. And the third one is obviously all of the cross-account vulnerabilities. That is a cascading effect of what we talked about earlier, which is the link between your backup and the recovery options, and also the compromises in your account and organization access. So with the organization risk, all of the cascading effects kind of hamper the recovery strategies that you currently have, which means that you don't have a proper access to your recovery options available. So the best scenario that you can get to is to implement a distinct authentication mechanism between your primary data, primary backup systems, and your recovery options. So by differentiating the access patterns to your primary data and your backup data, you would now be able to fortify your recovery options. And we're going to look into how we are going to do that in the eventual sections of it. But before we get into the actual details of what is available today, what are we going to talk about? We will discuss what is available to you as a customer in AWS organizations today. What we call the AWS Organization Security Framework, there are a lot of defense in-depth strategies that you can implement today to ensure that there is logical isolation between the access to your primary data and the access to your backup data. These are in the form of security control policies that would be defining your like common minimum backup strategies or your access control mechanisms at the organization level to ensure that there is a least privilege mechanisms being implemented. And there is also resource control policies available, which can ensure that specific parts of your resources are being protected from overusage. This could be KMS policies or KMS keys in nature. And then you also have access to IAM permissions boundaries, which will ensure that the principles of least privilege is actually followed, so that only required permissions are provided to the identities that are used for performing the backups, performing the access control to the backups, and performing the access to the recovery options. And then we also have concepts of KMS key vaulting, wherein you can use KMS key vault accounts provisioned in your AWS organizations, which then can be securely shared with any other account of your choice, so that you can apply defense in-depth strategies to the key vault accounts. So any kind of access patterns to that particular key vault account keys can be fortified in. And then we also have opportunities to do cross-account copies, which is simplified by using AWS Backup. So built on top of the AWS Organizations Trust model, you will now be able to make copies of your data from your primary account to a secondary account, which could be then used for fortifying your recovery options in case the primary account is compromised. And AWS Backup also have native capabilities like AWS Backup Restore Testing, which allows you to do the data integrity validation. So by doing all these controls that is available today, you're ensuring that you have access to a proper immutable backup copy and integral backup copy. But that's not all of it. The third pillar and the most important pillar of ensuring that you have your recovery resilience in place is the accessibility of your backups. And how can you do that? This is actually made possible by the introduction of multi-party approval. And we are happy to announce that yesterday AWS Backup and AWS Organizations launched what we call the multi-party approval workflows. What multi-party approval workflows does is to enhance the security of your sensitive operations. So imagine you will have fine-grained control of certain privilege operations that you have to perform on your data. The other important aspect that multi-party approval brings to the table is the formalized review process for the access controls for your recovery mechanisms. And it is also a native AWS functionality with built-in security measures. So the way it differentiates itself from any other homegrown or custom-built solutions is that it's a native integration, which means that it's actually an integral part of the AWS control plane offering, which means that it is available as long as the AWS control plane is also available. And most importantly, it actually takes away the requirement for implementing these custom solutions on your own. So the undifferentiated heavy lifting is actually offloaded to AWS as a service. Okay, so now let's unpack this particular multi-party approval that we launched yesterday and discuss the components that are involved in this multi-party approval workflow. The first and foremost component of this multi-party workflow is the IAM Identity Center, which is connected to an identity provider. And there are discussions around what are the best ways in which you could secure your identity path. You could have a primary AWS organizations in which you're relying on a primary IDP provider, and the better option would be, or the recommended option would be to have a secondary organizations with a secondary IDP in place. So in the eventuality of the primary IDP being compromised, you still have access to the secondary IDP that could be used to authenticate all of your operations. But we will look into detail how this is actually done. Then obviously, because of the deeper integration with AWS organizations provides you with the opportunity of applying that at scale within your entire organization. Then you also have a newer construct called the multi-party approval team, which has to be created in the AWS organizations console, wherein certain privileged users from your organizations are made part of this multi-party approval team. And the multi-approval team also have a construct called a quorum. Quorum is the minimum number of users out of your multi-party approval team that has to approve a certain operation. So imagine a scenario, you created a multi-party approval team with 5 members, and if you set your quorum limit to be 3, then any privilege operation that is sent to the approval for this multi-party approval team has to be approved by minimum 3 members, which is the quorum limit that we have set up earlier. Then the sharing of the multi-party approval team is actually made seamless using its integration with Resource Access Manager. So with the integration with AWS Resource Access Manager, you can share the multi-party approval teams with different accounts, either in the same AWS organization or a different AWS organization. We'll be looking at how this functions in the next slide. Then, because in the first launch, AWS Backup is the first available customer, and we're going to be requiring the AWS Backup Logic Layer Vault, which is a capability that we launched last year to be storing your recovery options or the backups in a secure way. So for those of you who are not aware of the AWS Backup Logic Layer Vault, it is a new type of vault that we launched in GA last year, which allows certain capabilities to be brought forward. The primary capability is that Logic Layer Vault now encrypts all of your recovery points at rest using a service-owned key. So your concerns about the KMS key being compromised does not exist anymore because the keys are now the responsibility of the service. And the second thing AWS Backup Logic Layer Vault does is to ensure that you set up a guardrail for compliance mode lock at the creation time itself, which means that now you'll have to ensure there is a minimum maximum retention period set up so that any recovery point that you store in a Logic Layer Vault will be locked by default on creation. And until the expiry of the recovery point or the end of the life cycle, not even the privileged user or root user can delete the recovery point, which actually completes the immutability aspects of the recovery point. And finally, the most important aspect of the entire workflow is the availability of the mount point or the share that you can access in the destination account. So all the items that we discussed until now is preparing for the eventuality. And once the event occurs, by sharing the Logic Layer Vault to the recovery account, you will now be able to perform restore and copy operations from the endpoint that you can see in the recovery account. Now let's see how it's all put together in a simple reference architecture. Like I was mentioning earlier, there is an opportunity for customers to implement this in two different constructs. One construct is to have the multi-party approval team to be created in the same AWS organization. That construct will allow you to recover from account level access compromises in the same AWS organization. But most of our customers were concerned about access to the management account in the primary AWS organization. If that is your primary concern, then the recovery options has to be set up in a DR or a recovery AWS organization, which ideally goes through a separate identity provider. Because if one of the options that you have to avoid is to have the compromise of your primary IDP itself. But this could also be local users that you can create in your IDC. So as you can see here, there is an expectation of an MPA team to be created beforehand, which could have n number of users. And the other option that you have to set up is that the minimum number of users that will form the quorum has to be set up while the MPA team is created. And after the MPA team has been created, using its integration with AWS Resource Access Manager, you have to assign this MPA team to an account in which your primary AWS Logic Layer Vault is residing. By doing this one, the owner of the AWS Backup Logic Layer Vault account, the primary AWS account, can attach this MPA team into a Logic Layer Vault. With that logical connection being made, we are now saying that, okay, the MPA team will be able to control the sharing of the Logic Layer Vault, which is the primary recovery option that we would want to protect. The next thing that obviously customers will have to do is to assign a recovery account which will be receiving the mount point or the recovery vault, which is the actual replica, not replica as in like pointer of the original Logic Layer Vault. This could be done during the creation of the MPA team or after the actual event has happened. And it is an assumption that you still have access to the recovery organization, which is a prerequisite for all of these things to function together. The advantage here is that this new capability of being able to share your AWS Backup Logic Layer Vault using Resource Access Manager is an augmentation to an existing available capability, which means that you can have the sharing done in the event of the primary AWS account being not accessible or the primary AWS organization not being accessible. Both these compromise scenarios could be recovered from using the multi-party approval scenario. The most important step in this entire operation is that the request to share a Logic Layer Vault will be raised from your recovery account. And when that recovery operation is raised, the approval request will go to all of the members of the MPA team. And if the minimum number of MPA members will approve this particular sharing, that's when the restore access backup vault that you see in the diagram will be visible to the entire user, to the account. And from that particular mount point, users will be able to perform restore operations or perform copy operations so that you can actually take the recovery points for further analysis and all those things. So how does this all come together? The primary construct that we have been recommending to our customers is that you would be using the capabilities of backup policies to create the first copy of your backup in the normal AWS backup vault, which is a requirement today that you have. And using a copy operation that you can set up in the AWS backup plan, you would be sending a copy of the recovery point into the logic layer vault residing in the same account. This will be done through a push operation or a copy operation after the backup has been created. So this now becomes your second copy. With the availability of multi-party approval team, any approval request that has been approved by the number of quorum users will be made available in the recovery account. So the recovery account now have options of performing restore operations so that you can seamlessly recover all of this data. So this capability that we launched yesterday is actually in addition to the existing AWS Backup Resource Access Manager share that we have today, which customers are using to implement constructs like forensic analysis. So you can, before even the account is compromised, you can extend the Resource Access Manager share into a forensic account, either in the same AWS organization as a separate account or a forensic account in your forensic organization. So you will now be able to perform all of your recovery validations using partner solutions like the one from Elastio.com. So now, just to recap like what we discussed until now, and recalling what we were discussing at the three important pillars of your recovery resilience strategy. The first pillar is ensuring that you have got an immutable backup copy available. This is made sure by applying vault logs in your recovery options. The second pillar is the integrity of your data, which is ensured through the integration with AWS Backup Restore Testing, which can be used to validate the recoverability of your data. And the third pillar is what we launched yesterday, called the multi-party approval, which actually augments the availability of your data. So just to recap here, all of these defense in-depth strategies ensures you've got a proper resilient recovery strategy in place. Okay. That's mostly what I wanted to cover today. Thank you all for coming, and if you have got any feedback today, please leave them in the app, and we will be greatly looking forward to it. And thank you for coming.